In the blink of an eye, they were a mile away from where they were 1 second ago. With the mother who was driving, she's now a passenger in the car, and the grandmother, who's never driven a day in her life, is now sitting behind the wheel of the car. Welcome to the Paranormal Post. I'm Clayton Morris. If you love true stories of the unexplained, then go ahead and smash that like button. It really helps with YouTube's algorithm. And please subscribe. There's also one more step that you can do, and that's to turn on the bell notification so you'll receive a notification when we publish a new video. Well, how many times have you heard about a UFO sighting? Countless, I'm sure, right? But have you ever noticed that most of them are usually experienced by just one person? That's because they are. About 90% of all UFO stories we have are told by one person that experienced the eerie incident when they were alone in the middle of the night. And this fact alone can be viewed as a turning point for skeptics, right? They can say, none of these things are true. They're only seen by one person. It's very rare, though, when we hear about an incident that happened to multiple people at the same time, where everyone just stood there dumbfounded. Today, we're going to talk about the bizarre Berkshire UFO incident that happened over 50 years ago. Here's the backstory. The sighting took place on September 1st, 1969 in Berkshire, Massachusetts at approximately 9 p.m. But because many people thought the witnesses are just a little crazy, the sighting was only taken seriously when the famous American show Unsolved Mysteries teamed up and interviewed everyone involved and their families. So it wasn't until about 2020 when Netflix decided to reboot the famous show and subsequently the Berkshire UFO sighting, when the story really began getting some traction. Let's go back in time a little bit, because then 14-year-old Melanie Kirkdorfer and then 10-year-old Tommy Warner were both in their separate houses when they remembered being transported into the same room with other children being there at the same time, only after a bright light suddenly appeared. So remember, they were in their own rooms in their own houses when they were suddenly transported into one room after a bright light appeared. Tommy Warner's story is amazing. He was in his house with his babysitter, Debbie, coloring pictures, when he says that he looked outside the window and heard a voice in his head saying, "You need to go home now." This would have scared anyone, let alone a 10-year-old. Tommy thought it was God or something, but some force inside him made him run outside, get up, and ran out. But according to Debbie, the babysitter, Tommy just ran out of the blue. She never heard what he heard. To her, he was coloring, and then suddenly, without warning, he just got up, started sprinting outside the house. Once outside, Tommy looked up when suddenly a bright beam of light shone down on him. He described it as having the air sucked right out, and it happened in a flash. Debbie, who was a few inches behind him because she was running behind him to catch up to him, wondering where he's going. She's the babysitter after all. She said she blinked, and Tommy suddenly disappeared from sight. She was right behind him in the yard. Tommy said that when he was transported into a room that contained other terrified children who disappeared one by one as he was looking at them. Shortly after he reappeared, he was lying on the other side of the house, pinned down in the grass by a beam of light. After approximately a minute or so, the beam of light finally went off. Debbie said that the whole encounter lasted about 6 minutes from when he disappeared to when he reappeared on the other side of the house and was held down by a beam of light. Tommy would later grow up to be an artist, and he drew a spaceship casting a beam of light down on him that was featured in the Netflix show. Here's what it looks like. As for Melanie Kirkdorfer, she'd been out with her parents and sister getting ice cream by Lake Mansfield. The family reported seeing this bright light blinding right in front of them. Her father naturally wanted to chase the object with his car, despite the fear that she and her sister had. They were screaming. While terrified in the back seat, Melanie said that she blacked out. And during that time, she remembers that she was levitating and being transported in a room where she saw a lot of other children. And one by one, they all disappeared. Sound familiar? The next thing she remembers, she was alone by the lake and had to find her way home. She was dropped off by the lake. Imagine, a young girl dropped off and has to find her way home. Despite not knowing Tommy at all, Melanie says that she felt an immediate connection with him when they first met, just like siblings. Now let's enter the Reed brothers, Matt and Thomas Reed. Thomas was 9 at the time. He was on his way home from Sheffield, a town close by where Melanie and Tommy were, along with his brother, sitting in the back seat, mother who was driving the car, and the grandmother in the passenger seat. Remember, she's never driven before. The four of them were in the car going through a covered bridge when from the side of the bridge a light flooded their car, nearly blinding them. He recalls a disc-shaped object, approximately 100 yards long, riding noiselessly from the Housatonic River near Sheffield. The whole family reported feeling a shift in their pressure, and as if they were on the ground one second and underwater the next. And despite being inside a car in the middle of a bridge, they heard none of that. The silence they experienced was deadly, peaceful, nothing. And then all of a sudden, the floodgates of hell broke loose. And the next thing any of them remember is being in the car in front of a drugstore 1.5 miles away. But 3 hours later, they lost 3 hours of time. And no one could explain why. That time gap seemed to be stripped away from all three of them. No one knows what happened, nor where did they go, how they got to that drugstore. Thomas Reed later described his side of the story as being taken aboard a tarnished, circular-looking vessel where an image of a willow tree was being displayed. And perhaps the weirdest thing about this incident is that the mother who was driving the car ended up in the passenger seat when they awoke, and the grandmother, who's never driven a day in her life, found herself suddenly behind the wheel of the car. Eerily, the Reed brothers, Matt and Thomas, say this was not the first time they experienced alien-related incidents. In the Netflix show, they say they've had 4 encounters with aliens since that fateful night. 3 of those encounters happened in the late 1960s with their grandmother and mother. And the 4th encounter was in 2009 when Matt was in Indiana. Enter Jane Green. Another person who reported seeing something weird that night was Jane Green, whose family founded the first Rexall drugstore in the northwest part of town. She was driving with her family south from Stockbridge to Great Barrington at the time, and she was abruptly stopped by a blinding white light. She watched as a large object rose silently into the air and then darted off over the mountains. She'll never forget it. She even told the interviewer, "Even if I get Alzheimer's, I will remember this." Many other locals also had eerie experiences that night. A radio broadcaster that night on WSBS radio in Great Barrington from Pittsfield to New Canaan, Connecticut, described when they called in strange lights soaring across the night sky. Unfortunately, those tapes were erased from that show, which was the custom after a few days of recordings. Other than the family, the witnesses to the events didn't know one another during the time. And sadly, when they began speaking up about their experiences that surprisingly matched up to the minor details, down to the minor details, they were bullied about it. They were harassed. They were ridiculed into silence, which was often the case with these types of sightings. Tom's mother, Nancy, has already moved the family from New York City to Sheffield at the time. She opened a diner so she could keep the financial status of the family up. She was so distraught by the harassment that she sold the diner and moved the family out of the Berkshires altogether. In 2015, the Great Barrington Historical Society officially recognized the Berkshire's UFO sightings as a historical event, and a memorial was erected but later proved to be controversial and then was painted on by vandalizers, thus it was later removed. It did at the time, though, feature a plaque that read, "The official induction of our nation's first off-world UFO incident." So as the 50th anniversary of the events of September 1969 had passed just a few months ago, those who saw and experienced whatever happened that night shed whatever concerns they had about the petty reactions of others and began relating their accounts once more. They don't pretend to know exactly what happened, only that something otherworldly did. They share that common bond, and the consistency of their recollections and the fortitude they have shown in the face of skepticism over the decades commands respect. Now, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already done so you never miss one of our videos when we publish it. And hey, if you know someone out there who likes stories of aliens or UFOs or unexplained stories, then go ahead and share our video with someone in your family or friend. We'd really appreciate it. And if you've had similar incidents, please share your stories with us so we can feature them here right on the show. We'll see you next time, everyone.